In a TikTok video with over 6.1 million views, Wei Shen, whose Instagram account describes him as an actor and model, documented his time in Hong Kong, staying in one of the tiny apartments, also known as coffin homes or cage homes.
Damn, I lived in Hong Kong's famous coffin homes. This is what it was like.
In the video, Wei explains that he accidentally ended up staying in one of these tiny apartments, and he says, quote, "I've never been in a room this small, and it felt a bit like a prison." If you've seen other footage of coffin homes in Hong Kong, you may see Wei's place as being quite pleasant compared to what's out there. The conditions within these homes are a reality of life for many people who cannot afford the private sector and are on the waiting list for public housing in Hong Kong. Upwards of 280,000 people are living within these conditions. This figure includes young people, migrants, elderly, and families who may often have to split up within these units. With such large numbers of people living within subdivided units, it is shocking to note that Hong Kong does not have a legal threshold for the minimum amount of space allowed within private living quarters. Like other world cities such as New York and London, this has led to an erosion of quality of living conditions within these subdivided units, and contributes to the overall housing crisis. Within these shared subdivided units or coffin homes, the circumstances are horrifying. People must live amongst all their belongings into a 24-inch wide by 67-inch length box while surrounded by filth and dirt. Many coffin home dwellers must also cook and use the bathroom in the same room, with up to 24 people sharing a facility. These coffin home units cost on average a few $100s a month. Many people feel forgotten by the state due to the daily struggles they must endure in one of the most affluent places, while they wait for up to 6 years for public housing to become available.
I've never been in a room this small. It felt like a prison a bit. And from memory, it wasn't even that cheap. I couldn't fit on the bed, and there was constant noise coming from outside and one of your millions of neighbors. And this is what peeking over the window looks like.
The state of Hong Kong's purposeful restrictions on the supply of land has meant that it is the most expensive property market on the globe, costing on average 4 times that of New York. In Hong Kong, where the state are landlords over almost all property, 27% of government revenue is derived from the sale of property. This means that people in coffin homes get left behind by the state in their pursuit of profit in collaboration with a handful of conglomerate property owners, as public housing is not a priority due to the lack of revenue that it brings. With homes costing over 20 times the median salary for people in Hong Kong, the pursuit of property ownership has become a distant and unattainable dream for many, but particularly for those who live in coffin homes and are at the bottom of the wealth ladder. Hong Kong has seen continuous economic growth for years, which has led to housing costs to skyrocket without giving a chance for the poor part of the population to adapt accordingly to this sudden change. Thus, many residents have found themselves forced to find shelter rarely larger than 180 square feet. Of all the world's housing crises, Hong Kong's may be the most formidable. The city of 7.4 million leads the world in housing prices and inequality, with 125,000 millionaires and 1.6 million people living in poverty. Home prices have jumped 187% over the last decade. In May, the number of public housing applicants hit 245,000, with an average wait time of 6 years, which is the highest in over 2 decades. This 6-year wait time for public housing will soon stretch to 6.5 and beyond. So here I'll give some examples of Hong Kong's crazy housing market. In 2021, Lau Choen, who is the daughter of the chairman of the Huang Kong Group, paid $154 million for a flat and 3 parking spaces in Mount Nicholson on the Peak. This was Asia's most expensive flat. About 50% of Hong Kong's ultra-luxury homes in the past 2 years have been sold to wealthy mainland Chinese or so-called new Hong Kongers. Buyers from the mainland are willing to pay big bucks for homes on the Peak, as spectacular views like those of Victoria Harbour are rare in China. In June of 2022, the $111 million sale of an 8,000 square foot, 6-bedroom mansion in the Shao Sun Hill neighborhood broke records as the most expensive home transaction in Hong Kong. The penthouse at Infinity, a luxury development on 8 Peak Road, broke records as the most expensive rented property on a per square foot basis in Hong Kong in March of 2022. Measuring 3,500 square feet, it reportedly leased for $96,000 per month. In December of last year, the Cameron Lodge luxury property on 5 Mount Cameron Road, again on the Peak, was sold by John Swire & Sons for $128 million, reportedly becoming the most expensive property sold in Hong Kong last year. According to a 2021 report from Oxfam Hong Kong, nearly 70% of the subdivided flat residents they surveyed said intense heat affected their daily lives. Some reported experiencing heat stroke and cramps, and some 60% of residents complained of poor ventilation, and 20% had no windows. The month of July was Hong Kong's hottest since records began in 1884, with a mean temperature of just over 30 degrees. The living environments are so bad and landlords don't do anything for them, says a social worker for SOCO, and many people have to live in subdivided units for 10 years or more.
定係覺得以後都喺度啊，都 OK。唔得喎，我真係暈啊，我真係癲。It's not OK。係啊。She doesn't want to stay here。諗住真係可以申請公屋咁咯，可以即係有可以申請公屋，快啲批公屋咁咯。而喺度我真係覺得好煩啊！我以前住嘅地方啊，洗手間都大過呢度啊。
Mrs. Lam came here from mainland China, looking for an improved life for her family and a better school for her daughter.
So if we use Singapore as a benchmark, Hong Kong's housing situation looks insane and its quality of living depressing. Singapore is approximately 65% of the size of Hong Kong, with the population of 5.5 million living in a land area of 720 square kilometers. In comparison, Hong Kong has 7.3 million people living in a land area of 720 square kilometers. Population density is high in both places. On paper, Singapore is the most crowded. In 2016, the average living space per person in Hong Kong's public rental housing was 140 square feet, while in Singapore, each public flat residence could enjoy on average a living space of 258 square meters. So why is this so? Well, it's because most parts of Hong Kong is hilly and therefore poses a huge civil engineering test for any construction, let alone residential buildings. On the other hand, Singapore is largely flat. In Hong Kong, only 24% of the land has been developed, and of this developed land, a mere 7% has been used for housing. Country parks and nature reserves account for 40% of Hong Kong's land. By contrast, 14% of the land in Singapore is used for housing, with only 9% set aside for parks and nature reserves. In terms of home ownership, Hong Kong pales beside Singapore. Some 91% of residents in Singapore own their own homes, while only about 50% of Hong Kong's 2.5 million households own their property. 30% of the population in Hong Kong are living in public rental housing. So although Hong Kong can look at Singapore and admire it from a distance, as this Bloomberg article points out, the reality of the situation is much different between the two places, giving an unfair perspective. Many critics point to the huge home-building policy of Singapore, which, despite having a similar climate and population to Hong Kong, could scarcely have a more contrasting reality. The only real solution is to move people to public housing, says a public policy professor at the City University of Hong Kong. And he finishes with, for many years ongoing, simply not enough has been built. Housing prices are already high in Hong Kong, and on top of that, the inadequate supply of land fuels speculation, further driving up prices. Many scholars and think tanks have put forth many solutions over the years. The foundation writes that they strongly believe that each subsidized housing provides a relief to the sandwich class who are trapped in a chasm. Their income makes them ineligible for public housing, but they're not wealthy enough to buy a private home. Responses to the Hong Kong housing crisis have seen innovative solutions being proposed by the public. One such solution has been invented by architect James Law in 2017 with the concept of the O-Pod. This is a micro-home of 9.3 square meters constructed within a concrete pipe, designed to slot between buildings within the city, with the cost aiming to be around $400 per month. Although this O-Pod housing is still a concept, it illustrates the extent of the housing crisis and the extremity of the proposed solutions. For citizens living in Hong Kong with the onset of protests in June 2019, the state responded with Carrie Lam's policy, under which many things were promised, such as starter homes for young professionals, subsidized sale flats for public rental housing tenants, and 10,000 new public rental housing units. However, critics say that these solutions could simply be to pacify the situation in the short to medium term. The long-term impact of these measures on the housing crisis and the issue of coffin homes remains to be seen. Thus, the problem of coffin homes does not seem to be going away. For tenants trapped in Hong Kong's most marginal living spaces, like Luang, these changes can't come soon enough. The government restarted his waiting time for public housing when he forgot to update his address after moving. So now, at the back of the line, he's due to get an apartment, he says, in 7 years.